Good morning, everyone. Although, judging by the time that most of you turn your assignments in, good, super early morning. So it's probably like 2 a.m. for most of you because you are all true teenagers. Welcome back. Glad to be finally doing this again. I feel like I haven't seen or heard from anyone in quite some time. Hopefully, you're all okay, doing well enough. Um, Hopefully your spring break was nice. Hopefully you guys did some traveling, saw the world. Um, I did not, but I am still here in my house, in my living room, hanging out. I'm going to talk a little bit of history today. Keep me sane because I haven't done it in a while and it's starting to drive me crazy. So here we are. Please check your grades. I haven't really updated much over spring break, but I will be on Tuesday morning, pretty much all day Tuesday. That will be my task, grading all the assignments that you guys turned in. So be checking your grades here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Make sure you're uh, good to go there. Make sure that I have seen and given you credit for stuff that you have done the work for. Again, if I've made a mistake, it happens. Just resubmit it politely in an email and I'll get that taken care of. Got any feedback on the videos, on the work, on the amount of work, on the type of work, on anything? Just let me know, and that would be great. Love hearing from you guys whenever I can. Oh, hi, Ellie. Hi, honey. Yeah, Ellie's Ellie made it. Yeah, you finally made it. Yeah, okay. Let me work. Lay down. I'll get your belly. There you go. Good girl. Okay, so before we begin, you're adorable. Before we begin with new content, let's talk about the old content. Has been a while since we talked about it. We talked three primary issues last time. The first was the Compromise of 1850, how that gold rush in California led to a flock of people moving to California and quickly applying for statehood. Triggers a huge fight over the status of California. Will it be a free state? Will it be a slave state? Our man Henry Clay saves the day one last time, comes up with a fantastic compromise wherein the North gets California as a free state and the DC slave trade is abolished. Big wins for the North there, things that they've been wanting there for a while, especially with the DC slave trade. But the South gets a little something, something as well. They get a Fugitive Slave Act that requires everyone in the North to take part in the capturing, the returning of these runaway slaves that have been escaping on the Underground Railroad. And they get the idea of popular sovereignty, where that's going to take a big that's going to be a big topic today here in just a minute. But remember, that is where the people of a territory get to vote and get to decide. We're going to use democracy to decide the status of slavery in a territory, right? Instead of having the fat cats in Washington decide, the people of that territory will get to decide. Both sides are furious, right? Both sides feel like that the other gets the better deal, and sectionalism will be worse than ever. Tension is as high as it's ever been. This was supposed to solve all the problems, and at first it seems like it does, but as time goes on and after, unfortunately, Henry Clay dies. More on that later. Then sectionalism gets worse going into the rest of the 1850s. It's going to be a bad decade. Without Henry Clay. The Nashville Convention, another topic we talked about. This is the South's effort to unite to become more of a regional bloc. They meet in Nashville during the proceedings that lead to the Compromise of 1850 to discuss Southern unity, a unified reaction. Right? They've learned that they need to work together. That way, they can have more strength, have more power, and they've decided we are ride or die together. And that's how the South is going to be going forward. They're going to be a unit, they're going to be a block, they're going to speak more or less with one voice, and they're going to act the same way, making them much more powerful, much more formidable when they start to cry secession, disunion, nullification, things like that. Last thing we talked about was the book Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Yes, you're tired, I know. This book, super influential, very, very, very popular. Thousands of people have their eyes opened to slavery for the first time after reading it, hearing about it. This also worsens sectionalism because the South is going to think that this book is a bunch of lies and slanders and half-truths. The North is going to think that slavery is much worse than they realized, and now that they are a part of that system, thanks to the Fugitive Slave Act, although they've kind of always been a part of that system, they just wanted to deny it, they are much less friendly towards slavery. They're much less willing to compromise with slavery going forward. More and more people are becoming anti-slavery, anti-expansion of slavery, especially. All of that is going to play a big, big, big role today in our new topics. We are going to get a little violent today. A couple of my favorite stories, but unfortunately we can't do this in person, so we'll have to settle for the next best thing. So let's get to going. So the very first thing we need to cover is a law. A seemingly innocuous law. It's just, a law about setting up a new territory, two new territories actually, Kansas and Nebraska, right? Who is going to get all upset over something like Kansas and Nebraska? Very simple. The topic is the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and it is just a law that organizes Kansas and Nebraska into territories. So if we look at our map here, they don't look quite like present-day Kansas or Nebraska, but they are the last, it's the last bit of area that has not been formally organized into territories from the Louisiana Purchase way back in 1803 with Thomas Jefferson when he bought all of that territory from the French. Most of it has just been on your maps labeled as unorganized territory, right? It's American. There's no government at all. There's no governor. Really, for the most part, there's no people. Well, a lot of people have been moving into what they're calling Kansas, or what I like to call Kansas. But a lot of people are moving there, and these people need a government. They need to have a governor. They need to have a constitution. And the same with Nebraska. Some people are starting to move in what is going to become Nebraska, but they decide, hey, we need to just go ahead and make these two territories official territories. Now, the guy behind all of this is a man named Stephen A. Douglas. You can see his name right here, Stephen A. Douglas. He is the architect of this, and he does it first for all of this for some pretty selfish reasons. In the mid-1850s, there is talk of building a transcontinental railroad, meaning a railroad that will connect everything here on the East Coast to essentially California and Oregon, right? We're going to have a railroad that goes all the way across the United States. It's going to be expensive. It's a very big undertaking for the government to fund. And the debate at this time is over the route, right? Where is this going to go, right? If the railroad goes through your area, goes through your state, goes through your community, that can be a big boom for your community. A lot more goods and people are going to be able to show up. Stephen A. Douglas wants this transcontinental railroad to come through his state of Illinois, and specifically he wants it to come through Chicago, where he owns some property. This could be personally beneficial if he gets it to come through one of the major outposts here in the West or the Midwest in Illinois and Chicago. That would be great for him politically. It would be great for Illinois, which again would be even better for him politically. But for the Transcontinental Railroad to take this northern route, it would have to go through either Kansas or Nebraska. And so he decides, well, these need to be organized, right? We can't have a transcontinental railroad running through the Nebraska territory to California if the Nebraska territory is still unorganized. We have to have it organized as the Nebraska territory. The people of Kansas want the Kansas territory organized. So Stephen A. Douglas says, okay, I will introduce a law to organize these territories. But to get the South on board, right, to get senators and congressmen from the South to agree to pass his bill and to organize these territories, he throws them a bone. And that is that Kansas and Nebraska will determine their status with slavery through popular sovereignty, the same way that Utah and New Mexico are going to be solving their issue at some point in the future, thanks to the Compromise of 1850. So, what Stephen A. Douglas is thinking, what he is hoping, is that the United States organizes two territories. The North will vote for the bill because this will hopefully help the North get the Transcontinental Railroad route. The South will vote for it because it will open Kansas and Nebraska to slavery thanks to popular sovereignty, so they will vote for it, and everyone will be happy. It does, of course, repeal the Missouri Compromise because if you recall, the late great Henry Clay drew a line right here, boop, 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 all the way across, that said everything north has to be free. That was agreed to by the South in 1820. Well, ever since then, they've kind of hated it because, as you guys, correctly observed and pointed out when we talked about the Missouri Compromise, what feels like 6 months ago, the South gave up a ton of territory, right? Minnesota, Wisconsin, Kansas, Nebraska, all of this territory they agreed would be free forever. Well, they kind of don't like that, so this is their chance to go back on that. So Stephen A. Douglas does get the Kansas-Nebraska Act passed. He gets these two new territories organized, and they are going to be open to slavery. It does officially, formally repeal the Missouri Compromise. Doesn't touch Missouri or Maine, obviously, but the provisions that deal with the territories are now gone. This is a huge Southern victory, and unfortunately for the North and Stephen A. Douglas specifically, nothing happens with the Transcontinental Railroad. They don't agree simultaneously to a northern route. It's not going to get built until after the Civil War. So his original thinking on this, his original plan for this gets torpedoed, but it does open the huge can of worms that will come from this when the North and the South react to Kansas, especially Kansas primarily at this time, now being open to slavery. It's never been open to slavery ever. Now, 1854, it is. Right? This is going to be the Northern perspective. This is the very, very famous political cartoon that comes out of this time period dealing with this, forcing slavery down the throat of a free soiler, right? This is the Kansas. You got Stephen A. Douglas right here forcing a slave down this guy's throat, essentially saying, hey, this area has never had slavery. The people who moved here don't want slavery. And now we're going to force them to possibly have it. So let's go back to our activity sheets. I got two questions for you here for number 4. The first is popular sovereignty is used in Kansas and Nebraska to determine slavery's fate in these territories. What consequences might this cause in these territories? What's going to happen now, do you think? Especially in Kansas. We can focus more on Kansas because not many people are going to move to Nebraska yet. Most are going to be going to Kansas. What's going to happen in Kansas when people in the North, people in the South open the paper in May of 1854 in June of 1854, and they read about this as, hey, all of a sudden, no more Missouri Compromise, popular sovereignty in Kansas. What kind of consequences is that going to lead to? The second question here, popular sovereignty is essentially just democratic voting on an issue. Why might that be a bad idea in this case, right? Should democratic voting be used in any and all controversial cases? That's kind of our instinct as Americans. Like, hey, we have an issue. Let's vote on it. Whoever gets the most votes wins. In this case, specifically with slavery, why might that be a bad idea? And are there other issues you guys can think of that would be similar today, or should we just always just say, we'll vote on it and we'll let the people who win that election be the winners? Might want to pause. Go ahead, give you a minute. I'll see you on the next slide where we will see the consequences very quickly of what's going to happen in Kansas thanks to Stephen A. Douglas and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. All right, here we go. Let's get a little violent. Next couple slides are going to be violent, actually. The first here is the outcome, the aftermath of what of Stephen A. Douglas's bill of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It's a time period called Bleeding Kansas. It's going to last from 1854 until 1861 or so, and it is a time when essentially pro-slavery people, mostly these people called border ruffians from Missouri, but people from the South or people with the with Southern pro-slavery sympathies, they are going to flock to Kansas. And anti-slavery people, sometimes from New England, from places like New York, even are going to flock as well to Kansas to encourage this. Companies are set up and they say, hey, do you want to go to Kansas, but you're too poor? We will pay. We will find a way to get you there, to get your stuff there so you can live in Kansas, because both sides need people there to vote. Right? They're going to say, hey, at some point in the future, there's going to be an election or two or three or four. There's going to be voting on a constitution or two or three or four. We want our side to win. So, if I'm a rich New Englander, I can pay for a dozen poor New Englanders to travel to Kansas, to live there, so they can vote the proper way, right? If you are a border ruffian from Missouri, maybe you don't, a lot of times they don't move to Kansas. They just say, hey, there's a vote today. Let's ride across the border and go vote. Definitely not legal, but it happened. Voter fraud happened because it was hard to combat at this time. But Kansas goes crazy almost immediately. Rival governments are set up. They set up two different governments. One is a pro-slavery government. One is anti-slavery government. Both claim to be, the government of Kansas. Both don't recognize the other. Both say, no, we're the true government. And the anti-slavery side will say, we are going to be a free state. The pro-slavery side say, we are going to be a slave state. Because of this, violence is going to break out. Early on, the first, 1854, 1855, there's a little bit of violence, right? It's more property damage. There are a few deaths, about 9 or so people are killed in this time period, which you don't want to downplay. 9 people being murdered because they think the wrong thing, according to their neighbor. That's normally what happened. There'd be some sort of altercation, argument. Hey, I'm pro-slavery, you're anti-slavery, and one thing leads to another, and I kill you. That's not a good reason to kill someone, or maybe it is. I don't know. But things really get taken up a bit in 1856. First, when these border ruffians, these people from Missouri, ride into Kansas, or ride into Lawrence, the town of Lawrence, Kansas, and destroy the town. It is what is known as the sacking of Lawrence. They sack it. They destroy the printing press. They run off a bunch of people. They burn down buildings. They burn down homes. They destroy the town. It's a big anti-slavery hub. And these border ruffians are there to prove a point, to intimidate, and to try to drive off some of these these anti-slavery forces in Kansas. This is going to trigger the first time this handsome / crazy person shows up. His name is John Brown. Many of you have probably heard of him. If you were here in West Virginia in 8th grade, you met Mr. Brown over at Harper's Ferry. We will meet up with him later at Harper's Ferry. But John Brown first shows up with a good chunk of his family, of which he has a huge one. He has 19 children. Thankfully, it's 2 different women. Not at the same time, obviously. The first one died after giving birth to like their 7th child or something, probably from sheer exhaustion. Then he married a fairly young woman. Lucky for her, he was much older. and had children older than her. Right? That wouldn't be creepy at all, right, ladies, to have stepchildren older than you. And it would be one thing, I guess, if you were marrying like Bill Gates or something. But look at this dude. I mean, that's an impressive beard that I'm going to try to emulate. But Bill Gates, he was not. He has about 4 sons with him in Kansas, and John Brown and his sons are hardcore militant abolitionists. They want slavery to be abolished. They want it to be abolished immediately. They moved to Kansas after the Kansas-Nebraska Act to try to make sure that slavery does not spread to Kansas. He is on his way to Lawrence. He and his sons are on his way to Lawrence. They have a few other followers, and they're on their way to Lawrence when they hear about the sack of Lawrence, when they hear that Lawrence has been destroyed by these border ruffians the night of May 21st, 1856. So John Brown takes 4 of his sons and 2 or 3 other followers and peel off from the main group, and they go to an area of Kansas that has seen really no violence called Pottawatomie Creek, right? Pottawatomie Creek, and they camp out there for a couple of nights, get the lay of the land, hiding out, and on the night of May 24th into the morning of May 25th, they go on a rampage. They go to a local cabin that they have spied out and detected is home to some of these border ruffians. And to get revenge for the sack of Lawrence, to get revenge, to send a message to these pro-slavery forces, which have been more violent than the anti-slavery forces, John Brown goes, all right, time to put our money where our mouth is. And they go up to this cabin in the middle of the night, and they knock on the door, and a man answers it. John Brown and his little raiding party grab the man, grab 2 of his sons, whisk them away out into the blackness of the night. The man's wife is there, going a little crazy. I mean, you can imagine, ladies, if you are camping with your dad and your family, and a dude who looks like this shows up and kidnaps him, you're going to be a little freaked out. These people are a little freaked out, and they have good reason to be, because John Brown and his followers, well, not John Brown personally, John Brown's sons are going to take swords, broadswords, think of like a sword that like a knight would use, and they are going to kill these 3 men. They are going to stab them and slash them, hack them to death with swords in the middle of the night in Kansas. John Brown will shoot one of them in the head to make sure that they're dead. So they've killed 3. They move on. They go to another cabin, and they repeat this. This time they take out one guy, and they drag him out and hack him to death with a sword. Now they've killed 4. They go to a last cabin. This time there's no women present. There's 3 men. They take these men out, interrogate them, set 2 of them free, but again, hack to death with a sword one more guy. This guy was a militant pro-slavery guy. They said, all right, you about to get dealt with. And they chop him to death with a sword, right? Pretty hardcore. Because of, how sloppy they were and how well known John Brown is, and just how, I mean, look at the dude, pretty memorable face and beard. People realize pretty quick. You okay? You good? Go back to sleep. That it was John Brown and his sons, so they're wanted. They go on the lam. They got to go on the run. They become wanted men. For some reason, it really messes up a couple of John Brown's sons mentally. The image of having personally hacked to death someone, it kind of screws with them for the rest of their life. John Brown kind of becomes a hero to some people. Some of these abolitionists in the North, some of the hardcore abolitionists in the North, go, all right, dude's crazy. I would want to do this, but he put his money where his mouth is. I respect that. And this is going to make John Brown famous and allow him to become infamous in his raid here in a couple more years. But this is going to now lead to a much more violent period in Kansas history. And because of the violence and the lack of ability to have a fair and free election, Kansas can't become a state till 1861. They vote 4 different times for constitutions. There is voter fraud constantly. In some of these places, I will say that a lot of it seems to be more on the pro-slavery side, but the anti-slavery side is not above it either. But like, for example, in one pro-slavery town, they go to have an election, and there's only like 1,000 people in the area who could be able to vote, and somehow that town casts like 5,000 votes, stuff like that. So even though the president, James Buchanan, the 15th president, even though he tries to get Kansas certified as a pro-slavery slave state a couple of times, this violence deadlocks Kansas, Arkansas, and it will not become a state until 1861. But that's not the only violence that comes out of Kansas. While John Brown is out there hacking people to death with swords, there is an instance of violence, one of the most famous, inside the U.S. Senate against a U.S. senator by a U.S. congressman. This story I truly wish I could give to you live because it is one of my favorites, but it is known as the caning of Sumner. You can see old Sumner here getting caned. Okay, calm down, Ellie. Getting caned, getting beaten with a cane, right? That's what caning is. He's going to be beaten with a cane. So we have 3 primary characters you need to know here. You need to know a guy named Charles Sumner. He is a senator from Massachusetts. He is being beaten. He is going to give a speech called The Crime Against Kansas. He gives a speech called The Crime Against Kansas in reaction to Bleeding Kansas, in reaction to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, in reaction to the sack of Lawrence. The things like the telegraph have come out, so news is traveling much quicker. And Charles Sumner, who is a hardcore abolitionist senator from Massachusetts, is outraged that the Kansas-Nebraska Act passed in the first place, that the Missouri Compromise has been repealed, that the deal that the North and South made has been torn up. Now he is outraged that these pro-slavery people are committing acts of violence. Obviously, he has not heard about John Brown yet, but he's going to give this speech called The Crime Against Kansas, where he's talking about what a crime it is that this stuff is going on in Kansas, that these border ruffians are running wild, that places like Lawrence are being torched. But he is going to single out a senator named Andrew Butler from South Carolina. And in his speech, I have some excerpts here, he really lays into him. Now, some of this might go over your head, but it's kind of the 19th century equivalent of really just roasting Andrew Butler, really flaming him. Here in the first big chunk of text here, he insinuates that Andrew Butler has improper sexual relations with slaves, things you weren't supposed to say. That kind of stuff happened in the South all the time, but gentlemen weren't supposed to talk about it. They weren't supposed to say it. So he attacks slavery right here, who he calls a harlot. He attacks slavery. He attacks Andrew Butler and his chivalry. He attacks his honor, these things that people in the South, especially in 1856, took really seriously. But he also roasts Andrew Butler personally. Andrew Butler recently had a stroke, and if you know anything about people who've had strokes, sometimes part of their face is like paralyzed. Andrew Butler suffered from this, right? The left side of his face was paralyzed, and so he couldn't talk right. He had a speech impediment due to this stroke. Well, Charles Sumner roasts him for that, says things says he cannot open his mouth, but out flies a blunder, right? That he is disfigured with error, right? He kind of insinuates that like maybe God did this because of his views and actions towards slavery, but He essentially just comes right at this dude for, hey, dude's got a speech impediment. Ha ha. Everything he says, he messes up because he can't talk right. Right? Kind of messed up. A lot of pro slavery people are outraged. The most outraged is Preston Brooks. He is a congressman from South Carolina, and Butler's cousin. So Preston Brooks decides, nah, this dude's got to get dealt with. Can't let him attack slavery, can't let him attack South Carolina, can't let him attack the South, can't let him attack my cousin, can't let him attack my kin. So what do you do? How do you defend your family's honor? How do you defend your state's honor? Well, normally, if you are someone like Preston Brooks, you would duel. You would duel. You would challenge this guy to a duel. You would go all Burr Hamilton on the situation. But you only duel with an opponent who is your social equal. And Brooks does not consider Sumner a gentleman, right? This is something only gentlemen do. And if you are not a gentleman, if you are lower status, and I am a gentleman, of course, which I am, we would not duel. Charles Sumner is not seen as a gentleman by Brooks. Plus, this is not the first time Sumner has gone around making enemies like this, and everyone knows, dude, don't duel. Like, you can go challenge him, you can mock him and his lack of honor, but he's not going to duel you, right? It's illegal, and in his eyes, outdated, childish, stupid. He ain't going to do it. He has the right to say whatever he wants. He's not going to get shot over it. So Preston Brooks decides, okay, well, then how do you deal with someone like that? Well, the typical way in the South of dealing with a social inferior that you're not going to duel with is to cane them. And that is exactly what Preston Brooks does. So shortly after Charles Sumner's speech, Brooks has been stewing and deciding what he's going to do. And he ultimately decides that to deal with Sumner, he's going to cane him. So Sumner is at his desk in the Senate. A day or two later, he's working at his desk. Preston Brooks walks up to him and says, "Sir, you have insulted my family and my state." He takes a very thick, heavy wooden cane with a metal knob on the end, and before Sumner can get up, before he can do anything, he just starts beating him. Just beats him upside the head, just beats him in the head again and again and again with this cane. Right in front of everyone else in the Senate, on the floor of the Senate. Now, Sumner tries to get away, but his desk is actually bolted to the ground. He can't quite get out. He is trapped. People don't rush in. You would think that people would move in immediately, but like a fight, like any fight that you guys have seen at school, most people don't rush in to stop it. They get out their films, or they get out their phones, excuse me, they get out their phones and they film it. That's what's going to happen here. There are a number of people who are going to just stand idly by and watch. A lot of people are going to enjoy it, right? Like this Ben Franklin looking dude and this dude. This guy's like cheering. They're going to, Charles Sumner is not a popular guy with a lot of people, especially in the South, and they're very happy to see this. So they let it go on briefly. The cane shatters, right? That's how serious this is. Like, it's a thick gentleman's cane. Has a brass knob. This thing is heavy duty, and it is broken over Charles Sumner's head. Preston Brooks then stands up, dusts himself off, and walks out of the Senate. Charles Sumner is left bloodied, dazed, confused, only semi-conscious. He will suffer a traumatic brain injury from this. He will suffer what we would call PTSD from this. He will not be able to return to the Senate in his full capacity for years. It won't be until during and shortly after the Civil War that he will be more or less back to normal. Now, what you're seeing here is not an accurate picture of what happened, but the political cartoon that was popular at the time that is anti-slavery, anti the South. It's a Southern chivalry argument versus clubs, where in the North people are going to go, wait a minute, dude. He gave a speech, right? He's getting attacked for using his freedom of speech. He's a senator. He's allowed to give a speech and criticize people, criticize slavery. This is what happens. This is the chivalry of the South. So in the North, this whole thing is going to spark outrage, especially because in the South, it elicits applause. Preston Brooks is going to resign his seat as congressman and run again immediately and win in a landslide. The people of South Carolina in his district love what he has done. A lot of his colleagues love what he has done. They save pieces of the broken cane. They save it like it's pieces of the cross, and they keep it and give it to people as souvenirs. Andrew Butler, or excuse me, Preston Brooks becomes a hero throughout the South. In fact, he starts receiving in the mail packages with gifts. Most of them are new canes. People send him new canes. Some of them are engraved with slogans like "Hit him again." Right? This is not something that sparks outrage. This issue of slavery, the expansion of slavery, the right of the South to have slaves has become so contentious that you can beat a senator on the floor of the Senate, and that will make you a hero. You can chop people to bits in Kansas with a sword, and that will make you a hero, right? We are getting into a dangerous time. We're getting into a dangerous mindset in America where violence is not looked on with horror. It is not a ghastly thing to do. It is applauded. It will make you famous or infamous, depending on the territory. Crazy, crazy time. It's not the only bit of violence in the Senate or in the House of Representatives. In fact, going forward, the joke is going to be that everyone in Congress is carrying two guns, and the only person who's not carrying two guns are the ones who are carrying a gun and a knife. So these people in Kansas are killing each other. We have a bit of a mini civil war. It's called the border war between Missouri and Kansas. We have more or less two territories, two states, kind of with low levels of violence against each other. Now we have violence in the Senate. We have more expected violence. This is starting to become the norm, which is scary. So, what do these actions by Brown and Brooks illustrate about the state of the country? Are these actions like anything you've ever heard before in American history? What do these events tell us about where the pro-slavery versus anti-slavery debate was and where it is headed? What does this portend going forward? What does this tell us about the mid-1850s in America as a time period? One more thing real quick, and we'll be done. New political parties. This is going to be really important going forward. The Whigs are no more. Henry Clay is dead, and the Whigs can't really survive without him. Primarily, the issue that kills them is the expansion of slavery. In the North, most Whigs have become anti-slavery expansion. In the South, most Whigs are still pro-slavery expansion. So in the mid 1850s and 1854, 1855, heading into 1856, they just can't decide on a platform. They can't decide on candidates. They just don't work together anymore. And so the Whigs decline and they fall. In the North, a new party will emerge, the Republican Party, the same Republican Party that we have today. Obviously, the issues have changed, but the Republicans show up first as a sectional party. They are only in the North. There are no Southern Republicans at this time. In fact, in the future, when Republicans are on the ballot, like Abraham Lincoln, they don't even show up on Southern ballots. So, like when Lincoln runs for president in 1860, if you lived in Florida, you could not vote for him. He's not on the ballot. So they are a sectional party, and their primary platform, the primary thing that they are about, is they are going to stop the expansion of slavery. They are not an anti-slavery party per se. They're not an abolitionist party, right? They're not an abolitionist party. They are not saying we're going to get rid of slavery. They're saying we are going to stop slavery from expanding. They run their first candidate for president in 1856, John C. Fremont, former explorer, a pretty famous dude in America at this time, helped in became famous for exploring and fighting in the Mexican-American War. He runs in 1856, loses to James Buchanan, who becomes our 15th president. Republicans will have a surprising win, though, for its sectional party, especially in 1860 with Mr. Lincoln. There's one other important party to talk about, and the very last thing we have to talk about, and they are called the Know Nothings. They call themselves the American Party, but they are called the Know Nothings because they started as a secret society. And anytime you were asked about this secret society, if you were in it, you were supposed to just reply, "I know nothing. I know nothing." And so they get the nickname the Know Nothings. They are what's known as a nativist party, meaning they are anti-immigrant. They are hardcore anti-immigrant. They have slogans like America for Native Americans, but they do not mean who they would call Indians. They meant people that were born here. They are heavily opposed to immigrants, especially the immigrants of the 1850s, who are largely Catholic. These nativists are very xenophobic. They are saying America should be for white Protestant men to run, right? At this time, there were a lot of Irish showing up who experienced a lot of discrimination, right? Not slavery, but a lot of discrimination towards the Irish. Your famous stories of, help wanted, Irish need not apply. But there's also a lot of Catholics coming from Germany at this time. Don't like that. The Know Nothings, say, hey, this is America. You should speak American. This is America. It's a country for white people. It's a country for Protestants, not evil Catholics who worship the Pope, not for Indians, not for people from Asia, China, South America are coming to places like California. We don't like them. We don't want them. We should limit immigration. We should stop immigration. We should keep it to the dominant Protestant religion. A lot of those strains are still around with us today. It does not always go away. So you have, now, of course, the Democrats are going to be much stronger in the South now, and they are going to use disgusting, pictures like this to say, here's why you should vote for us, because we're the party of the white man. But the important thing to take away from the Republicans going forward is that they are united in their opposition to slavery, specifically its expansion, and they are not a states' rights party. Right? They are a national party, a central government party. So, last thing, briefly summarize each of the following parties' stances and platforms according to what we've covered so far. So the Democrats, the Republicans, the Know Nothings, or the Americans. What do they stand for, especially in regards to slavery, right? Which one's anti-slavery? All of that. If you need to look it up, you want to use Wikipedia to help you, feel free. Then you're going to do, real quick, your wrap-up activity. Literally a 2-minute video called Sound Smart on Bleeding Kansas. Couple of questions for you. Here, I'll put these on the instruction sheet as well. Right? Why are so many people flocking to Kansas? What party supported the pro-slavery side? What party supported the anti-slavery side? That stuff will help you with this one as well. What did John Brown and his sons do? What type of state did Kansas eventually become? Add this to your activity sheet. Do not turn it in. Do not turn it in. Remember, if you are having trouble logging into my VR spot, for a video like this, your username is everything in your email before the @ and your password is the same one you use for your Chromebook. Thank you guys for watching this. Hopefully you're getting a little bit from these videos. Let me know. Remember, I'm always open to constructive feedback as long as you are polite. You don't come at me too hard. Hopefully I didn't put you to sleep the same way that those two precious pups were put to sleep by the sound of my voice. But pleasure as always talking a little history with you guys. Hopefully you're getting a little from this. Hopefully you're staying safe, staying sane, staying inside. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Oh, embarrassing. Come on. There we go. See ya.